You get the...
Took him to the moon to ask him what was inside the no, at this time they were just curious. No one knew Sydney. I reckon a machine would have taken them away. Every time we go to the town,
Hi everyone. Our first speakers are Stephen and Evan Strong. They're original people and they've been doing so much for the forbidden archaeology field. Just incredible, and they've had decades of experience, and it's an honour to have them here at the Star Family Conference. We'll hear about what's happening with the skulls, which you've all had the updates on, so we'll hear what's happening from Stephen and Evan themselves. So I'd like to introduce Stephen and Evan Strong.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got about 2 hours to tell you a little bit of the story we've gone through. I'm going to start by explaining how we got where we are today. To do that properly, I'm going to do this in a blackfellow way, where we do a timeline that goes all over the place. Works for us and always has. And it begins with about 10 years ago. I was asked to go down to Ramidjeri country to meet some elders and to meet the Ramidjeri. Nothing was given as to why we were doing this. We were just told to go down there. I spent a week down there. At the end of the week, I remember I had my black clip where I write all this stuff down there. I've been writing stuff down, and Kano came up and threw it away. He said, enough of the white fella stuff. And then I was given ceremony. It's quite interesting. The reason I'm bringing this up because of what this particular conference is about. At the end of ceremony, which went for quite some time, I sat down with one of the elders, and we talked about, well, he talked about what I was going to talk about and what Evan was going to talk about. And the reason I went down there was they told me a story about original people in ancient times circumnavigating the world in a figure eight. I thought, gee, I want to hear about that. And he brought that up, and he said to me at the time, he said, and how do you think we went around the world in a figure eight? I said, by boat. He said, yes, that's one way. What about the other ways? I said, I'm not going to talk about that. I said, look what happened to Eric von Daniken. I said, no, Peter, we will not be talking about the other ways. I'm going to stick to the boat. It's quite ironic that about 3 or 4 years later, we'd written 3 books for University Press of America. And we started the 4th book, and we sent it to them. And in it we made 3 inadmissible academic faux pas. Number 1, we were going to mention a lady by the name of Madame Blavatsky. We were told by the editor, under no conditions will you be mentioning that woman. That was a start. Number 2, we wanted to talk about a gentleman by the name of Professor Elkin. We were told we could put him in, but we had to put a 1-page disclaimer with someone saying he's talking rubbish. And the 3rd thing we wanted to mention was the Pleiades. And we were told, under no conditions can you write about that. No disclaimer, nothing. It's out. And what that meant was we left University Press of America because we were asked by the elders to go through the academic field, and we have made many enemies, haven't we, Evan?
More than I can count.
More than we can both count. In fact, I'm sure there are dartboards in different academic institutions with inners and outers, and I think I'm the inner and he's the outer. So, that's how this began. And what we found as we've gone through this story is that the word, the Pleiades, has become such a part of a mantra of where we're taking this, that now, wherever we go, it becomes a major part of this discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do now is we are going to talk about the new skulls that have been found. We are going to talk about the standing stone site. I'm not talking about the rocks now, but whenever I speak about the rocks, I speak about culture or anything, they always listen. Because I report back to the other rocks, and if I make a mistake, I can assure you, they let me know about it. And we'll tell you more about that for those who come to the rocks workshop. Enough of our advertisement, we'll get on with it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. I want to start, hopefully, by putting up a graph with Evan. Oh, thank God for that. I've got to tell you something. When we go to about an hour and a half, I have no idea what's coming next, so it'll be exciting for all of us, more so me than the rest of you. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, Mainstream's version of what I'm sitting and facing today, and myself. This is how we came about. And we start off being basically a fish, come out of there, make our way up here, and here we are today. But I love the way humans are shown. I love the way they begin bent down like this, and this one's got a mouth open, ready to bite you, then it becomes more passive, more passive. It's funny, but the last human, that's not a stick they're carrying, I can tell you now. It's a bloody spear or a rifle. That's how this ends. They've got it wrong at the finish. It gets worse as it goes along. Our belief is that person should be about here. And I believe we're falling backwards. And that's what this story is about. So, how does this begin? Next one, please, Evan. Right. Can we go back one? We don't need that yet. Right, it doesn't begin quite like that. It begins like this. When this began, We started by looking at a book called Voices of First Day by Robert Lawler, who's from Australia. And there was a passage on about the 23rd page, I think, where he spoke about the fact that Professor Wilson and Professor Can did some research in Australia and basically said humanity began here. So we checked it up and we found his original paper. And I found it interesting. In his paper, we need to understand something. You know, everyone's been taught. I'm a school teacher, I know what we've been taught. And we were told that we came out of Africa. I read the paper that they put up. And you know, they never said we came out of Africa. What they actually said was probably came out of Africa. There's such a difference between the two words because science have grabbed this as being, it must be that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've got to tell you something. That probably they spoke about. The reason they said that was, I don't know if you know this, but they came up with something called Eve, and they came up with the fact that Eve and Adam came around about 150 to 200,000 years ago, but all of that was based on work that was done in Australia. It was based on two assumptions. Number one, and it works very simply like this. The original people got to Australia 50,000 years ago. That's the first assumption. And the second one is they have 1/3 the genetic diversity of the rest of the world. So the Africans came first. If you multiply that by 3, you get 150,000, maybe 200,000. There's your date. That's how it all came about. That was the end of the story. Everyone decided, these guys have got it right. And from that day until today, they have hung on to that. That paper was done in what? 1990?
1 or 2?
Yeah. Okay. That's the story. End of story. Then we found Rebecca Can. Not the male, but the female did some more work. And what she did was she studied the mitochondrial vials of 126 vials of blood found from 26 indigenous groups around the world and was shocked because of two things. They assumed they got there 50,000 years ago. She said, no, we got this wrong. The original people are at least 400,000 years old, the oldest race on the planet, and the most important part of this story was, and this turns up a lot, came from 2 different lineages. And they couldn't give either of them. They assumed Alan Can came out to Australia twice, 1987 and 89, and selected and found 31 vials and found full descent original people. I don't like using that word, but in this case it works, because if there's white in there, there'll be a tainting of the genes. And what they found from those 31 vials, 22 different mitochondrial strands. Now, I won't go into a lot of detail of mitochondrial DNA, but the most important part is, I've got Y chromosomes, all men have that, women have mitochondrial DNA. One is very predictable for women. The men you can't do much with. You can't date it, and it's really a willful piece of work. But the women is very predictable. There's one mutation every 3,500 years. That's what the experts say. And what Wilson found out is 22 times 3,500 is 77,000 years. He wrote 50 on his piece of paper. He was wrong. In fact, he admitted it. The day that he, well, basically within days before he died, which is a big problem because he didn't get to carry on, he said something like, it may be too far out to admit, but while Homo erectus was battling the rest of the world, if you got to Australia and did something dramatically different, not even with stone tools, for it is here that Homo sapien first evolved and went out to the rest of the world. Theoretically, ladies and gentlemen, that should have been put in every textbook, and we shouldn't have been talking about it out of Africa. The problem is this: Wilson died virtually after saying that, and Can, in 1991, she's got one unforgivable sin in the early 90s in America or anywhere else. She's a woman. They're not going to listen to them, and they didn't. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story. That was the story. And then what happened was, in Australia, because that happened, Roy Simmons from the Commonwealth Serum Laboratory decided to do something rather brave. He got a hold of 600 vials of full descent blood, not 31, 600. Now that is a decent survey. And what he said was they were looking for an Indian content, an African content, And what he basically said was in the 1980s, and again, this was not put up anywhere, we got it wrong. It's all wrong. This is older than any other set of genes on the planet, and there's nothing African in it. Now that's the best study that's ever been done. Now you put that together, and I always wondered when I was in the schools, why was I teaching it? Oh, I never taught it. I got a lot of trouble for that. I would never teach it. I said, I can't teach it, it's unscientific. So ladies and gentlemen, that is, we could go through quite a few of these particular mitochondrial studies and they'll come out the same time after time, but we're not. We're going to go through it very quickly now because there are some more important parts to this which relates to the skulls and the stones, but we have a rule. Whenever we talk about this, you get a 30-minute science lesson first, then you get the other stuff after. Because everyone in this room has been to school. I can tell. I'm a school teacher, and I can tell because there's a glazed look in your eyes you'll never get rid of. When you went there from the very beginning, your learning started with, let's memorise your tables, and it continued on from there. And all the way through you were told, this is the answer. And I'm sorry, you've been conditioned to believe these things, so we have to get rid of that by using white fella science. Now you can move on, Evan, you went a bit earlier on. Okay, now this is what happened. This is done by a gentleman, this has come from Duncan. This is up about 1.5 years ago, and it's wrong. That's what's fascinating about that. The dates there, what they found was, and you've got to understand, this is what they said. There was Homo sapiens, and they split from a family or a common mother and father called Eve. And one group was Homo sapiens, and the other group were Neanderthals and Denisovans, and they all split at that time. So if you find Neanderthals or Denisovans, the split hasn't occurred. Now this came up 1 year ago, and I think it was Chris Stringer, said, I've got bad news here. Okay, he said there's really bad news here because we got it wrong. We found Neanderthals that are at least 400,000 years old, which means we thought it was 200,000 years. It's not. It's 400. Well, I can tell you since then, they've found presence of Neanderthals and Denisovans in Europe, which is 700,000 years old, which is 3 times what the date was. And what they're saying now, and what he said was, the date's wrong and the place is wrong. We've got to do it again. Now, Chris Stringer is one of the top academics in the world. That's why we put this up. What they're basically saying was, guys, forget this. Don't talk about out of Africa 200,000 years ago when humans turned up. It is wrong. That part we know for fact. And what's interesting is since that article's come back, there's been so much more stuff that's come out that's pushed back the dates of both groups. Next one, please, mate. Right. Next up. What had taken place with all of this stuff was when we did mitochondrial DNA, it's fairly good, but it's not complete. What you've got to do is what's called a genome count. You basically got to look at the whole makeup. And that's a piece of hair that was picked up 3 years ago. It was actually picked up 100 years ago, but analysed by a Danish crew, not Australian crew. They will not do any archaeology on original stuff. They don't touch it. This came from a Danish crew, and what they found was they analysed it. And they came up with this reading. They said, guys, we got it wrong. Europeans and Asians, much, much younger, around 40,000 years. There are 2 ancient races, African and Australian. And what they said was, in their paper, when I read it back to front, you cannot put geography with genealogy. You've got to understand that. Genes don't give you a place, they give you a race. And then you assume where that race comes from. It's not the same thing. What they said was, we don't know which is first, but we looked the books up and it says the original people got to Australia 50,000 years ago. Oh, right then, Africans are first, Australians are second. That was the base of it. And then they said, but it doesn't make sense. Because the axes in Australia are like nowhere else in the world and nothing like Africans. Why did they forget how to make axes? It didn't make sense to them. They actually said that. They said, we're going to pick the Africans because in the books it says that Australians have only been 50,000 years. That's not right, and I don't know if we're even doing that today, but there's a lot of dates that go past that. Right, now, here's the theory. If it was 75,000 years ago, this is what you may have been told at school. When I went to school, we didn't even get that. I go back a bit further. We were told basically there was just the Neanderthals and that was it. What they said happened was that 75,000 years ago, a group of Africans, or 74,000 years, something like that. They came out of Africa and then they walked through the Middle East. They went through the whole of Asia, because the Asian race doesn't start to 40,000 years ago. Went down to Indonesia, somewhere along there, and then about 30 of them got on a boat, because you need that many, otherwise you'll have inbreeding. And all of them together decided to sail to a place which is at least 100 k's from any landfall, which means they can never see it, and hope there'd be something on the other side of the horizon, and then settle up. That is what we've been told. Now, there's a major flaw with that. It's the biggest flaw, and every scientist I've spoken to says, I don't want to talk about it. And it's that. That's Mount Toba. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you've heard of Mount St. Helens, that gets a score of 1. Mount Toba gets a score of 2,800, which means Mount Toba was the equivalent of the eruption of 2,800 Mount St. Helens at exactly the same moment. Now, you need to understand what that did to the world. What it basically did is it covered the whole world bar one continent utterly with ash. In fact, to give you an idea how much ash was floating around the world, Vesuvius, if you go around there, you'll find 10 centimetres of ash at that eruption. With this eruption in India, you will find 3 metres of ash, and in Greenland, 1 metre. What Josephine Flood and others said is it wiped out the world's population to between 5,000 to 10,000 people, of which 5 were in the southern part of Africa that escaped most of it, and maybe a little bit up around Sweden, Denmark, but that never made sense because they weren't supposed to be in Africa, so that was rubbish anyway, they just made that up. Here's the point. If there are 5,000 Africans left in the whole of Africa, why is it they left the continent? And it was south of Africa. What did they do? Breed like rabbits and then cover the whole of Africa up in 1,000 years? Because basically, if your whole population's been wiped out and you alone are left behind, you're going to re-establish your grounds. You're going to get used to where you were. You're not going to go from South Africa all the way through Africa, then walk through the Middle East. And remember, when you're walking through the Middle East and Asia, there's no one there. They're all dead. You can go anywhere you want. So you're going through the jungles? No, I don't like that. You're going through the desert? Not keen on that. Temperate lands? Don't like that. Let's get on a boat when we get to Indonesia and just fly off somewhere and see what happens. There'd be so few people left. It doesn't make sense. And I've got to tell you, when something doesn't make sense like that, because I actually spoke to the Herald about that and said, we can't put that up. I said, well, that was a science writer. I said, why not? Right, screw up everything. I said, well, don't forget, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, American philosopher, you may have heard of her. Wonderful lady. It's called Judge Judy. And she said, if it doesn't make sense, it's a lie. I remember telling the lady on that science edit, what does Judge Judy mean? It makes more sense than what you're talking about. It's a lie. It's a straight out lie. So ladies and gentlemen, this migration that took place 75,000 years ago took place while that happened. What human on this planet would decide, I'm going to go to the opposite side of the earth and establish myself there? And remember this, there's only one continent anywhere that has no ash. This continent. When do you think the original people sailed out? And when they sailed to Asia, who's going to greet them? Nobody. There'll be a few left over. I'll breed them. And that is why original genes are all over this planet. But we'll get to that later. Next one, please, mate. All right. And here's the big problem. And this is the problem that scientists will agree doesn't make sense. And I'm a very good example of it. My Denisovan content is 4.7. That means I'm 1/20th. I'm not Homo sapien. In fact, any black fella must have a Denisovan content of above 3%. And only original people have that high content. I saw a paper recently on someone in Micronesia that had a Denisovan content of 2.3. I was thinking, God, why don't you do it to me? I'm double that and a bit more. It'd be much more interesting. I don't even look black. It'd work out much better. Now, here's the problem. The Denisovans are found in Siberia. And they're found in Spain. And we've got a date of 500,000 years in Spain and 16,000 years in Siberia. They were everywhere through the whole of Europe, the whole of, but never in Africa. But they were never in Australia, but they were. Here's the problem. If you've seen Denisovan jewellery, and I have, I saw some stuff that was done 50,000 years ago. If we did it today, we'd think it was brilliant. I'm going to tell you something. They were far smarter than we were. Far more advanced. And don't forget, Neanderthal has a brain capacity of 1540 cc. We're 13 to 1400. We're not the smartest of the three. We're the dumbest. This is the truth. This is just the way it is. Now, here's the problem. The experts have decided the Denisovan content got into original people 44,000 years ago. Well, guess what? The Denisovans were only in Europe and Asia. The original people were supposedly stuck in Australia and didn't come out. So the question is, where'd the genes come from? It wasn't by post. It couldn't be. They must have been up close and very personal. For me to be 4.7 today, they were close. Extremely close. And they met each other in every sense of the word, including the biblical begats. That all took place. And 4.7 today only proves that. Now the question I'm going to ask is, well, where did they meet? Did the Denisovans sail to Australia before the Africans, as Bert Robert reckons? No. The Denisovans met the original people as they sailed to the world. Now, no mainstream academic can explain why that took place, so they don't talk about it. And I'm going to tell you, that's what science does a lot. They put out a piece of information, they mention it for a day, and then it's gone. And they will never put it in context, which is what we do. Okay, and by the way, this gentleman, if you saw him today, remember, they were making jewellery that we can make today 50,000 years ago. Far smarter than us and much wiser. And actually, if I walked past in the street today, you'd probably just say g'day and keep walking. You probably wouldn't notice them as being different. I don't. And I hope you don't, because that's part of my mob anyway. Next one, please, mate. Right. And here's where it gets very interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Now they're starting to look at the genetic base of the original people, and they found another gene. And this gene's very different. Do you know why? They can't find it. It's not in Denisovan, it's not in Neanderthal, it's not in Homo indigna, it's not in Homo Red Deer caveman, it's not in any of them. It's not in Homo erectus. There is a gene in original people that cannot be found on any place on this planet. And I've said to many people, and I've put it up in our papers, well, if you can't find a genetic link on the Earth, look up. There's nowhere else to look. Now, our belief is that unknown DNA is Pleiadian. That's what it is. And because they can't find it anywhere else, until they can find a link for me to prove to me it isn't, I'm standing by that. And I also believe that that unknown DNA is in every human on this planet. And I'm also suggesting to you right now, you should get in contact with Pleiadian genes as it stands right now, because there's something taking place where you need to lock into that. That's why those genes were given out around the world, because you need those original genes in the change that's coming. Now, we all have agreed. We don't know where it come from. I haven't agreed with that. I know full well, and I've asked the elders, they've told me the same thing. Also, they finally found the proof, did they? Yeah, they found the proof, but they don't know what they found yet. Next one, please, mate. All right. Okay. Enough about the women. We've got to give the men an opportunity to speak too. As I said, we've got what's called Y chromosomes. It's in our sperm. And we pass it on from generation to generation. Now, you can do some work with it. Not much. You can't date it. There's about 41 different haplotypes involved in it. But I can tell you something about the original people. If you go around the world, there's 41 different Y chromosomes that men carry, and they're spread out evenly. So around here now there's about 20 men. There's a good chance you guys don't share the same Y chromosomes. But if you're original, there's a difference. Again, it's always different here. It's the square peg. Original people, 81% of them belong to 2 haplotypes. And the researchers that did this said, oh, I think they've come from, here it comes again, 2 lineages. 2 lineages again. You're going to find the genes and the Y chromosomes keep repeating the same story. Well, what's fascinating about this particular piece of work, it was done by 2 Russians whose names are?
Kolesov and Rahensky.
I can't say it. That's why we have sons and daughters, ladies and gentlemen, for things we can't do. By the way, his main job is when I go wandering off, because I never have a script, his job is to listen to and remember where I was at when I forgot where I was going. and then put us back. That's why we do it. Yeah. That's why we make children, to clean up our mistakes. Right. Now these guys did the biggest study of men's sperm. That's how that, from my point of view, it sounds like a boring job, on this planet. And what they did was they did a very, very detailed examination of 400 vials. And they decided they were going to prove where did they come from. And this is what they did. They took those 400 vials and they compared them against 13 distinct African haplotypes. And they decided that the more that was there, the closer the link. And they figured this will prove one way or the other where Adam comes from. Because we know Eve isn't African, but we're not sure about Adam. And this is what they found. They chose people who weren't African. They took them from every race on the planet. And therefore, if you've got 13 times 400, you've actually got 5,200 possible matches. And do you know how many they got? None.